Apologies, I'm going to have to sit. Okay, thank you. I think it's been about 5 years since I spoke it in the show. Oh, that's okay. Thank you. Okay. Oh, nice. Yeah. Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's first of all, it's an honor to come and speak here. Just because you were once the rabbi here, it doesn't mean it's still not an honor to come and speak in front of everybody also. So, and I do remember well what Rabbi Rosenberg mentioned. I remember well when Rav Moshe was nifter. I remember that it was in, where were we? We were on Mohawk, correct, on Mohawk, right, 67th Street, 69th Street. I remember in the auditorium speaking to everybody there about Rav Moshe, who Rav Moshe was. So Rabbi Yaakov, not so much so, but Rav Moshe certainly. Anyway, thank you very much for having me. I want to thank very much Rabbi Rosenberg for giving me the opportunity to come to speak. I'm proud to say Rabbi Rosenberg was my Talmud, he was my Chavrusa, and he's my successor. And I'm proud to say that as well. Again, everyone, thank you for coming tonight. Let's start with Rabbi Yaakov. First of all, you'll notice, anybody know who the famous Rosh Yeshiva of Telz Yeshiva was in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s? Anybody know who he was? Anybody know? His name was Mordechai. Rav Mordechai Gifter. Okay. What did everyone call him though? Anybody ever call him Reb Mordechai? They always call him Reb Gifter. Rabbi Yitzhak Hutner was the Rosh Yeshiva of Chaim Berlin, Rabbeinu Chaim Berlin in Brooklyn. Did anybody call him Reb Yitzchak? Call him Rav Hutner. So why is it that they call Yaakov Kamenetsky Reb Yaakov and Moshe Feinstein Reb Moshe? Why do they do that? So the word Reb in Yiddish, of course, is a sign of respect. It means Mister, but it also means a sign of closeness to somebody. It feels like a sign of affection for somebody. We call him Reb. I think that's part of it. That's why Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky and Rabbi Moshe Feinstein were called Reb, because they were rabbis for the people. They did a lot of things. Now, I was thinking to myself also, many of you have probably heard of Rabbi Chaim Kamenetsky. Rabbi Chaim Kamenetsky was just nifter a couple of years ago, and he was a brilliant person. Kol Torah cool, everything was in his mind. He saw everything. Somebody once came over and asked him, can you tell me where such and such is? What's the source for this and this statement? So the person said, I watched Rabbi Chaim's face, and I could see him turning pages in his mind. Turning pages, going through Masechtas, 1, 2, 3. So he knew everything. But again, when his father, who was the Stipler Gaon, told him, he said, I don't want you to be a Rosh Yeshiva. I don't want you to be a Rav of a shul. I want you to sit and learn, that's all. And that's what he did. He sat and learned and did a wonderful job. But Moshe Feinstein, however, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, they sat and learned too. But look what else they did. They were also the Rosh Yeshivas of the respective yeshivot, and they were also fundraisers. And they affected the community in which they lived, and they did things for all of Klal Yisrael, for all the Jewish people. Okay, so let's start with Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky. He was a child prodigy. He was what we call an Ilui in the yeshiva world. Rabbi Reich. I want to welcome Rabbi Reich, the Rav of Adat Yeshurun and La Jolla. Thank you very much for coming. So he happened to be age of 6 years old, and he was sitting in shul, and there was a group learning behind him, and they were discussing something, and they wanted to look up a pasuk, a verse in the book of Shoftim, the Judges, book of Judges, and they couldn't find one. So Rabbi Yaakov, 6 years old, got up and said, "Which pasuk, which verse are you looking for?" He said, well, it's about this and this. He quoted it to them, 6 years old. So they asked him, how'd you know? He said, well, in Cheder, I just finished learning the book of Shoftim. That's why I know. But he remembered it. All right? He remembered it. Also, it happened once. By the way, let me begin with this. You're going to have a lot of stories tonight. It happened to be, I remember once I read about a Hasidic Rebbe who was trying to get a point across to his Hasidim. And they just weren't getting it. So he said, you know what? It's time to tell stories. Stories, people can see what the point of the story is, what the purpose of it is, and it really hits home and it helps you remember because you remember the story. So we're going to be a lot of stories here, but hopefully that you'll gain. I'll be mentioning things. Why am I telling you this story? What are you supposed to gain from it? Because the idea was, I believe it was, what the impact that they still have on us 40 years later. So certainly the impact is still there for sure. So it was one Xmas Eve in Europe, and what happened was Xmas Eve in Europe. I don't know why, but the non-Jews, the Gentiles, would burn tar on a huge bonfire. And everyone came out to see it. There was a big fire and all that. Everyone came out to see it. And all the Jewish children were told, you're not allowed to go to see it. It's almost like you're celebrating Xmas. So it happened to be that night, Rabbi Yaakov slept in. Next morning he came to school late. So the Rebbe right away said to him, aha, you were there watching, right? He said, no, I wasn't. He said, no, you're lying. I know you were. And he gave Rabbi Yaakov, little 6-year-old kid, a patch in the face. So Rabbi Yaakov remembered that. Several years later, when his father wanted to send to the same school that he had gone to and have the same Rebbe, he wrote a letter to his father and he said to him, he should not be your other son's Rebbe. He's not fit to be a Rebbe. Why? Because he doesn't know his students and doesn't trust his students. A teacher has to know his students. And so Rabbi Yaakov said, you can't go like that. That was Rabbi Yaakov always. And when it came to Jewish education, he knew his students. He knew them well. And if you ever teach, you know, every kid is different. They're not cookie cutters. And you have to know them. Okay, so anyway, it says here, it said that Rabbi Yaakov learned from this incident that a Rebbe should know his students. And also, don't punch your student unless you know for sure that he's guilty. Not just because you think he's guilty. That's, okay, next thing. So Rabbi Yaakov, when he was less than 13 years old, he was sent to the Slobodki Yeshiva. Anybody ever hear of the Slobodki Yeshiva? Yes?
Heard of it.
Okay. I've heard of it, okay. Slobodki Yeshiva was, everybody heard of a city in Lithuania called Kovno. So Slobodka is right across the river from Kovno. And in Slobodka, in the 1870s, I don't remember the exact year, but there came a person his name was Nosson Tzvi Finkel, who's known as the Alter of Slobodka. Alter doesn't mean he was old, he was 33 years old when he started the yeshiva. Alter means it's a term of reverence, of respect. And the idea of the Alter of Kelm, the Alter of Slobodka, all of these men were what we would call mashgichim, a mashgiach ruchani. Mashgiach means what? What's a mashgiach? Supervisor, right? Person supervisor. You usually think of mashgiach in terms of food. But also ruchani, in the yeshiva, this is the man who was in charge of making sure that the development, the spiritual development of the boys was perfect. Okay, so the Alter of Slobodka, or Nosson Tzvi Finkel, I happen to have a student in my class right now, in 8th grade. He's named after Rav Nosson Tzvi. I told him, your father should have named you another middle name. It should be Nosson Tzvi Finkel. That'll be your full name. But it didn't work out that way. But Rav Nosson Tzvi was the ultimate mentor of the yeshivas, of the boys who are in the yeshiva. His students were the all-stars. If you had an all-star team of Rosh Yeshivas, this was the all-star team. He had first of all, he had Rav David Leibowitz. Rosh Yeshiva started by Chavetz Chaim. So I'm only talking about Rosh Yeshivas in America. Started Rosh Yeshiva of Chavetz Chaim. There was Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, Rosh Yeshiva in Torvadas. There was Rav Ruderman, Rosh Yeshiva of Ner Yisrael. There was also the Rav Hutner, who was the Rosh Yeshiva in Chaim Berlin. Rav Reuven Grozovsky, Rosh Yeshiva also in Torvadas. And Rav Lazer Finkel, his son, Lazer Finkel, who really caused the greatness of the Mir Yeshiva. He moved the Mir Yeshiva from Europe to America to Israel, and today the Mir Yeshiva is quite possibly the largest yeshiva in the world. The only thing that can match it is Lakewood. We're talking about 10,000 students, larger than anything we've ever had before. Okay, so he studied under Rabbi Yaakov, studied under him, but Rabbi Yaakov was an interesting person. He also studied grammar, math, and physics. Most people didn't do that in the yeshivas, but he did. I remember we had a student in our yeshiva who he was in our yeshiva, and he was, after Seder was over and Mar was over at 10:30 at night, he'd sit down and go over grammar, diktuk. And I thought to myself, at 10:30 at night, that's the most boring thing you could possibly do at 10:30 at night. But this student, this fellow, he was such an expert in grammar. So it was the greatest Balkari I ever heard in my life. Never made him, in 4 years of hearing him at Lane, I only heard him make 3 mistakes in trup, and never a mistake in pronunciation. But he was very special. Anyway, so Rabbi Yaakov learned all these things. So, and he used them in his Torah study, because when you go through Talmud, you see the Talmud, there are certain things where you have to know these things as well. Anyway, so it happened to be that one time there was a famous mathematician, didn't say who he was, famous mathematician who came to Slobodka. He himself had gone and learned under Rav Chaim Brisker, and he also learned under Feinstein, his fellow. So some of the students came, when he came to Slobodka, students asked him, so who was the greater genius? Was it Rav Chaim Brisker or was it Feinstein? So he said, Chaim Brisker had the koach hatzir, he could explain things perfectly, but Feinstein was the greater genius. So Rav Yaakov walked over and said, how old were you when you were under Rav Chaim Brisker? He said, 18. How long were you when you were Feinstein? 45. That's the difference. Okay, that's the difference. If you had him at the same age, you would have seen that Rav Chaim was the greater genius. You didn't appreciate it when you were 18. So Rav Yaakov was known as a Yiddish, a kliger yid. Means he was smart, but not just smart, but he was wise. He was sagacious. I remember Rabbi Weiser, when we first started the day school back in the 1980s, I remember he always told me, I'm calling up Rabbi Yaakov about this and this. I need advice about this and this. I always called him. So everyone called Rabbi Yaakov. I'm ahead of the story a little bit. Okay. He used to talk about his friends. And in Slobodka, which is the great yeshiva, I heard plenty about Slobodka because my Rosh Yeshiva's father was a product of Slobodka. But the Rosh Yeshiva talked about Slobodka all the time. But we shouldn't think that Slobodka never had any boys in there who were heretics. There were heretics in all the yeshivas. Think back into the late 19th century. If you were a bright boy, you weren't into religion at all. If you were a bright boy, where could you express your brilliancy? Where could you find fulfillment in your brilliancy? The only place was in yeshiva, because they couldn't go to colleges. So that's where they went. So you had these boys coming into yeshiva, and of course they came and they spoke to everybody in the yeshiva, and they influenced some of these boys. So Rabbi Yaakov said that he felt sorry for some of these boys who became influenced, and they unfortunately left Torah and led a secular life. So Rabbi Yaakov said to somebody, he said, I want you to know, all of my descendants are Shomer Torah mitzvos, and he had several hundred descendants. All of them are Shomer, all of them keep Torah and keep mitzvos. A story. Rabbi Yaakov was once on a plane, and he had his granddaughter with him on the plane, because he was elderly and they didn't want him to fly by himself, so she was there to sort of serve him. So every 5 minutes, she said, Zaidi, you need something, you need this, Zaidi, you okay, you're comfortable? Every 5 minutes. So across the aisle from him is sitting the president of the Histadrut, the big labor union in Israel. And this guy is watching, and after a half hour, 45 minutes, he turns to Rabbi Yaakov, and I assume he spoke Yiddish to Rabbi Yaakov. So he said, I don't understand this. My grandchildren, I only see them when it's their birthday and they know I have a present for them. But your granddaughter, she can't stop asking you, can I do this, can I do that? So Rabbi Yaakov said to him, I'll tell you the difference. See, you believe in evolution, and therefore man comes from monkeys. So if man comes from monkeys, then you're closer to the monkeys, and your children are away from the monkeys, so they don't think you're so great. My granddaughter knows I'm closer to Sinai. That's why she knows I'm great, and that's why she acts that way. Rabbi Yaakov always had a good answer for everything they would say. Okay. After he had to leave Europe because things were getting bad in Europe, they could tell wise people, Kluger mentioned, knew that Europe was at an end. The Yiddish Europe is ausgespielt already. That was it, all over. The Jewish Kluger, the smart, the intelligent people could see the handwriting was on the wall. This was going to be it. There are many people who left Europe in the 1920s because they said it was impossible, and so they were told, "Don't go." For instance, when my Rosh Yeshiva came to Europe, to America, there were many people who said to him, "Don't go to America. In America, it's a treifa Medina. You go there and you lose your Jewishness right away." And the old legend about if you go into the New York Harbor and you went down to the bottom of New York Harbor, you'd find thousands of pairs of tefillin. Okay. That's just to tell you something. But there were people who said no. They said this is it. We better go there. At least we can start something. And unfortunately, many people didn't listen. They stayed in Europe. And it wasn't they lost their Judaism. They lost their lives because the Nazis came, and that was it also. Anyway, so he left and he came to Seattle. Seattle, Washington. He was there for a few weeks. He took over for Rabbi Wogelanter. I don't know if it's a relation to the Rabbi Wogelanter we know, but it was a Rabbi Wogelanter there. And then finally, the rabbi was on vacation. He came back, so Rabbi Yaakov had to find a job. He had to also bring over his family. So he got the offer of a job in Toronto. He went to Toronto, and there he was there for a few years, and he had an influence on the people in Toronto as well. For instance, the reason why is everywhere they could relate to him. He was a person that I'll tell you, many Rabbanim I know, they're great men, but you just feel they're you're in awe of them, and you don't want to get too close to them. You don't feel comfortable getting close to them. But Rabbi Yaakov, who you should have been in awe of, that's true, but who had the kind of personality that you didn't feel that way standing in awe of him. You felt you could get close to him. And that's how they related to him in Toronto when he got there. There was a certain person, when he walked to shul every Shabbos, he walked around the block, several blocks, to walk around to get to the shul instead of walking directly. Why? Because on the way, there was a Jew who was Machal Shabbos, who didn't keep Shabbos, and he said, if this Jew sees me walking, he'll remember it as Shabbos, and he shouldn't be doing what he's doing. So now, instead of doing it unintentionally and not being punished that way, now he's doing it intentionally because he knows it's Shabbos. I don't want to do that to him. So I'm going to walk all the way around. That's how careful he was, sensitive he was to other people. He was at a Pidyon Haben in Toronto. And at the Pidyon Haben, that's what you redeem. You redeem your firstborn son at 30 days, on the 31st day. So he came there and he was talking to the maternal grandfather. And he says, by the way, what's your name? And he says, my name is Siegel. He said, Siegel. Siegel comes from Sgan Cohen, means assistant of Cohen. Who's the assistant of the Cohen? Levi. That means his mother was a Bat Levi. If you have a Bat Levi, you don't have a Pidyon Ben. So now what does he do? He's going to tell everybody forget about the food and everything? So he said, no, we'll have the food. We're going to celebrate the fact that the child, after he's 30 days old, he's considered to be a Ben Kayoma. Up until 30 days, you don't know if the child is going to live, because now he doesn't have the immune system of his mother until about 30 days. So we'll celebrate that. They got out of a tricky the situation that way. Another thing, this happened in New York also, unfortunately. Rabbis weren't well paid. Baruch Hashem, they are paid well. But they weren't paid well. So how did they make a living? So they made a living by giving a hechsher, by giving a rabbinical supervision of foods. It was a dog-eat-dog thing. Everyone wanted to get it. So they were willing to outbid the next guy and go lower and lower. But to go lower and lower, that means you had to go supervise more different foods to get some more money to make it even for yourself. So unfortunately, many rabbis were, I don't even call them rabbis, they were probably called reverends in those days. And they were unscrupulous, and they didn't even bother to supervise it. They just put their name on it, and that was it. I'll tell you a story that I saw with my own eyes. My daughter and son-in-law were head counselors of a camp, and the camp right across the street from the camp was a restaurant, a kosher restaurant. So it had two hechsherim, two rabbinical supervisions. One was the okay, and the other one was some chassidish. So I said to my son-in-law, I said to him, they both come every time. They figure out how they come, who's coming when. He said, the guy with the chassidish one never came. He never showed up. He just relied on the okay. But they put on the chassidish one, so the chassidim will come and eat it. But they're really relying on the okay, which is a pet peeve of mine, because people say things about the OU. And yet, the truth is that 64% of all kosher items that have a hesh on them, it's the OU. No one can have a kosher anything unless you rely on the OU, because the ingredients come from OU. All right, anyway. I'm just saying that because Rabbi Beryl Wine, who was in the 1970s, was the head of the kashrus in the OU. He always was, it also was a pet peeve of his as well. Okay, anyway. I believe it was 1968, he retired as a Rosh Yeshiva. I've never heard a Rosh Yeshiva retire, but he retired as Rosh Yeshiva in Torah Das. And he moved to Muncie. And there in Muncie, he was known as the rabbi. Everyone came to him for advice. He was the main advisor for everybody. Okay, and he was also on the Etzes Gedoli Yisrael. It was Torah Masorah has a group of rabbis, the leading rabbis of America, and whenever they have Torah Masorah it's a organization running the day schools. They used to run the day schools of America. They don't do that. They're not up and up anymore. But they were, and they had this council of great rabbis, council of sages. So he was on there, and he dealt with all the issues that were coming up in America. For instance, America Torah, these issues affecting the America Torah community. He responded to the Russian Jews' influx. All of a sudden, in the late 1960s, right? Am I correct? 1960s? 70s, okay. I know because my friend here was one of those. Baruch Hashem. Early 70s, right? Early 80s, sorry. Okay. Anyway, so they were coming in. So Rav Yaakov said, here they are, we've got to do something with them. Communism tried to destroy religion in them. We've got to give them back their religion. What can we do? So he went to the schools. He said to the schools, you've got to take these children in. The school said, what are you supposed to do with them? They can't function in our school. So he said, then you have to set up classes for them. It's no excuse. You have to set up classes for them. And they did. He also was instrumental in starting a school called Be'er HaGola. Be'er HaGola was also just a school for Russian children. And again, it was making sure that they had a Jewish education. He felt it was like a godsend that Hashem was sending all of these children to America, give them the religion. New York teachers strike in 1968, also a godsend. The schools closed. You were teaching there, right? You remember that? Okay, all right. Marty is a survivor of the New York school system. No, it wasn't so bad. It wasn't that bad. He tells me some tales, but it wasn't that bad. Anyway, so they went on strike. So now what are all these people going to do with their children? So people started thinking, maybe I'll send them to the day school. So now you're going to send them to the day school. Our day school has this issue all the time. How do you take kids who can't read Hebrew and put them together in a 7th grade class where the 7th grade boys or girls have had Jewish education for 8 years, can do a lot more than just read Hebrew? What do you do with these children now? So again, he said, you've got to take them in. This is your opportunity. And they did, and began to take them in. All because everyone respected Rabbi Yaakov, what he said. He also would speak very often in Torah Masorah, especially to Machanchim, Jewish educators. And since he was a Jewish educator, he spoke well, and everyone listened to him, what he had to say. In the 1960s, the Israeli Knesset became liberal, and it liberalized the Israeli law on autopsies. We know autopsies are forbidden, but it was a whole issue. Nituach Meitim, and it was a whole issue. What do you do? But because the government went easy on them, so there were many doctors who just did autopsies for no reason, just because they just wanted to see something. We know autopsies are allowed under certain circumstances, but not just like that. It got so bad, in fact, that European doctors didn't have enough bodies to work on. Israel sold Jewish bodies to Europe to be able to, they could do autopsies on the Jewish bodies there. So Rabbi Yaakov came to Israel. This was 1964. Came to Israel, and he went to see Levi Eshkol, who was the prime minister. And he talked to him. He spoke to him well. Levi Eshkol, by the way, spoke Yiddish more, he spoke Hebrew. And he spoke to him, and he got him to agree. However, there was another rabbi with him, and the other rabbi said to him, "No, we think that bodies are so important that even if a limb is amputated, we make sure it's buried." Rabbi Yaakov looked at this rabbi, and he went, as if to say something's wrong. And then he said, he pointed out, he didn't want to say it, look at Levi Eshkol's hand. He was missing the part of two fingers. And he said, you should have been, you don't have to mention that. Be a little more sensitive to the needs of somebody. And that's Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, always sensitive to everything, anybody's needs. And that's why everybody loved him. One last thing, he wrote a sefer called Titan Emes Yaakov, which is that Yaakov, talking about Yaakov, the original Yaakov. Yaakov was a man of truth, tremendous man of truth. And Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky was called Yaakov because he also was a man of tremendous truth. So I'll give you an example. He was a bacher. He was a young boy in Slobodka. And came Pesach. He didn't go home. He didn't fly home for Pesach. Nobody stayed home. You stayed. Nobody had planes. Nobody could afford to go home. So you stayed in Slobodka. He was invited for Pesach by a family. However, the family, he wasn't 100% sure how kosher it was, especially for Pesach. He didn't feel comfortable. So he said to him, "That's very nice, thank you very much, but I only eat gebrooks. I don't eat gebrooks. I only don't eat gebrooks." That is a stringency that Hasidim do. It means that you make sure that no liquid gets in contact with matzah or matzah meal or anything like that, just in case it wasn't baked well. And then it still could be of some raw somewhere in raw, and therefore don't let water come into contact with it, because then it'll rise and become chametz. So that's what he said. Now, he said that for a good reason. He didn't want to embarrass the people, so he said that. But Rabbi Yaakov said it, the rest of his life he didn't eat gebrooks. But over 80 years, about close to 80 years, he didn't eat gebrooks. Because he said, if he said, I said it, it have to be true. So that gives you a sense of Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, the love he had for Jews. I heard this story from Rabbi Beryl Wein, Zecha Tzedek Livracha. Rabbi Beryl Wein, who passed away just less than a year ago. He said that he moved to Monsey also, Rabbi Wein, and he started a shul there. So that was fine. Then he decided to start a yeshiva there. Why? Because he felt the yeshivas in Monsey. This is a big problem that most yeshivas had until at least 20, 30 years ago. Every yeshiva did the same thing. They had the same program. The same program that Volozhin had, everybody else had the same program. Now Volozhin, which was a yeshiva, the first yeshiva in Europe in 1803, so they dealt with the 200 smartest and brightest boys in all of Europe. So they could have that kind of but not everyone was bright like that. Not everyone called it something like that. So you had to do something to make it a different. So Rav Beryl Wein started the yeshiva, and he said, our boys are going to have a Seder. Seder means to learn straight for 2 hours, not 4 hours like other yeshivas. So the other rebbes in the yeshiva came and said, how can you do that? How can you tell people not to learn? You have some seats over here. We also have right here 2 seats, right here too. Please come sit down. Welcome to the Rissmans. Thank you for coming. No, don't worry. Sorry as if you didn't come at all. You don't have to say sorry. Yeah. So Beryl Wein said to him, beautiful saying. They said we should have 4 hours. So he said, I'd rather have boys learning 2 hours than not learning for 4 hours. I think he's 100% right. Not everybody can do that. That's not everybody do. So what happened is, Rabbi Wein was getting a lot of flack. So he went to Rav Kamenetsky And he asked him, what should I do? The Rav Kamenetsky said, let me know who the buns are giving you trouble. And he did. He went to these guys and he told them that you got to leave alone. Leave a barrel line alone. There is a need for that, a yeshiva like that also. Okay, that's Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky. Okay, any questions on that? No. Alrighty. We go now to Rav Moshe Feinstein. Okay. I was a young whippersnapper, about 19 years old. I was now in my second year in Yeshiva University in YU, and I was in a program called JSS, because I came in with no background. JSS was people who had no background. So I came in, and my second year, I had a teacher, his name was Rabbi Shaya Sif. Rav Sif was my Rebbe. I consider him to be my Rebbe from YU, even though I had him just that year, the second year, and the third year. But also in the summertime, I also had him. We went to what's called Morisha Kolel. So I had him several times. But he was a wonderful Rebbe. And that first year I had him for Jewish laws. Every other sentence he said was Rav Moshe this and Rav Moshe that. Never heard who this Rav Moshe was. But I said, boy, he must be somebody special. So I held my Rebbe, Reb Sif, in awe. And he holds Rav Moshe in awe. So how much more so Kal V'chomer, I should hold Rav Moshe in awe also. So I did. And time went on. I had this chus of meeting Rav Moshe 3 times in my life. The first time I was a nudnik. So what I do? I was down in the Lower East Side. I had a job out in Long Island in a shul, and I felt the shul's mechitza wasn't tall enough. So, the mechitza, the separation wasn't tall enough. By the way, that's exactly the height that Rav Moshe held, by the way, from the bottom up. Okay, anyway, so it's 5 feet and some inches. I don't remember how many inches it was. Anyway, so I happened to be walking down in the Lower East Side, and who do I see? Moshe Feinstein, walking with his grandson, Tendler. I forget, Benjamin Tendler, I don't remember, with his grandson. Anyway, and they're walking. So I said, oh, this is my opportunity. Besides, it gives me a chance to speak to Rav Moshe Feinstein. So, of course, I ran off there. Well, not run, I walk over to Rav Moshe. I said in Yiddish, can I fragen the Rosh Yeshiva Akasha? Can I ask the Rosh Yeshiva a question? I'm not going to say I know Yiddish here. And so his grandson says to me, what's the question? So I said, well, I want to know, according to Rav Moshe, how tall does the mechitza have to be? So the grandson says, it's in Igras Moshe, Chelik Hey. It's in the book, 5th volume. Look it up, it's this and this law. So Rav Moshe turns to his grandson, and he says to him, I'll never forget the words. He said, the younger man hat mir gefragt the kasha, let me give him an answer. He asked me a question, let me give him an answer. And he told me exactly what it was. I think Rav Moshe held an amma was 21 and some 21 something inches, something like that. And that was my first encounter with Rav Moshe Feinstein. Next time I met him, I was in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. I was teaching, and the principal's wife, the principal of the school at the time, his son was having a bar mitzvah. So, and it happened to be that the principal's wife was related to Rav Moshe Feinstein's Rebbetzin. So Rav Moshe came to the bar mitzvah. Here's Rav Moshe. It happened to be that was Shabbos. The next day, Sunday, I was having a chalakah. What do you say that? Upsharon. That's the word. Upsharon for my oldest son. So I thought to myself, wow. So I went over to Rav Moshe and said, the Rosh Yeshiva going to be here tomorrow? He said, yeah. I said, can the Rosh Yeshiva be willing to take a cut for my grandson's hair, my son's hair? He said, Rav Moshe, I could see, didn't bill for that stuff. So he said, bring the Yingel do. So I brought my son to him, put his hand on his head, and gave him a bracha. That was more valuable than watching him cut the boy's hair. So that was my second time. And the third time, my brother-in-law, she lived me well, Rav Sadin, Rav Kalman Sadin, was a musmach of Rav Moshe. He got smicha from Rav Moshe, rabbinic ordination of Rav Moshe, and he married my wife's sister. And so Rav Moshe was the one who did the marriage. So I was there. So I met him again there. So that was my 3 times with Rav Moshe Feinstein. Usually there's a saying that says familiarity breeds contempt, right? You know somebody. It's almost everybody, whether they're a sports star or a music star or movie star or whatever it is, or a star, whatever they are. Doesn't matter. The more you know about them, the less you're impressed with them. Right? Think about it. It's true. Absolutely. Listen, I just spoke about Yaakov Kamenetsky. I would not tell a lie now. Okay? So it's true. But with Rav Moshe, the more I knew him, the more I heard about him, the more, wow, I was wrong. He should be in such awe that how you can even approach a person like that. Yet he was a very approachable man. I used to go down to the Lower East Side to learn MTJ when I had time. So I'd go down MTJ, Mesivta Tzoras Yerushalayim, which was his yeshiva. And this was the Lower East Side. This was already in the 1970s. Unfortunately, the Jews who were left in the Lower East Side were not the most put together Jews. Let's put it that way. In Nebuch, they had problems, psychological problems, things like that. So they used to come into MTJ. They'd make noises there. There was a Rav Moshe was trying to give a shiur. They made noises. Every time somebody wanted to get up to move now, Moshe said, no, wasn't game. Leave him alone. He's all right. He would never do anything to anybody. And once in the middle of a shiur, somebody came over and started asking Rav Moshe for tzedakah, for a donation. Rav Moshe said, wait a second, he gave him money. Tremendous amount of patience and sensitivity for another human being. He was the Rosh Yeshiva in MTJ for almost 50 years. He answered countless questions. I think, if I'm not mistaken, his book on the Shalos and Tshuvos was a responsa. There are at least 9 volumes. Maybe they're more by now. Even after he passed away, they found more of the Tshuvos, more of the responsa that he did, and it came up another volume. So I think 9. Am I correct, Rabbi? Right? 9 responsa. So it's in each book contains hundreds of questions. And he was the rabbi's rabbi when it came to this. It happened to be that rabbis all over the world, they were great Gaonim, great rabbis. Rabbi Yoshe was alive. The Steipler Gaon was alive. There were a lot of great rabbis around. But when it came to a certain question that rabbis felt uncomfortable to answer, it always ended up in front of Rav Moshe Feinstein. They always used to say, Rav Moshe had grace of places. He has big shoulders to bear the responsibility. One of the most famous cases I saw about Rav Moshe was that a young couple came to, I don't know if it was Rabbi Yoshev or who it was, maybe Rav Shlomo Zalman. They came to him and they had twins, Siamese twins, connected at the chest. They didn't know what to do. What should we do? The doctor told him, we have to operate. We can save perhaps one. Together they'll die. One heart cannot pump enough blood for 2 of them. So they didn't know what to do. So they went to either Rabbi Yoshe or Rav Shlomo Zalman. He said, the only person you can ask this question is Rav Moshe Feinstein. I'm sure they knew the answer, but they didn't want to take the responsibility for the answer. That's the difference. So they sent the answer to the question to Rav Moshe. Rav Moshe said, there's a concept in Judaism and Jewish law called rodef. If someone's pursuing somebody else, then the person who's being pursued is allowed to kill the person who's pursuing him. And if you see somebody pursuing somebody to kill him, you can kill that person because you can save a life. So Rav Moshe said, the child, when they were attached to the heart, the weaker one, he said, is the rodef. The weaker one is possibly dragging to death the stronger, healthier one. So he said, you can put to death the weaker one in order to save the life of the. So, no, I can see why no rabbi would want to say that. But again, you have to save a life, right? So Rav Moshe did it. Unfortunately, they did kill the younger one, and the older one had the heart, but he passed away also, unfortunately. But again, that's the greatness of Rav Moshe Feinstein when you hear they can answer a question like that. But he was also a person who had patience galore for everybody. That's what made Rav Moshe so great. There are plenty of people. I know in Europe, my uncle, Zichron Levracha, my mother's brother, used to sit and learn all the time. He was one of these fellows who took a pin and stuck it through a page into several pages. And then he could tell you on the other pages what word the pin went through. So they were geniuses. Like geniuses, there were galore we had. But people who could show sensitivity, you have to be a posek. You have to have sensitivity. And you have to know the people you're dealing with. You have to understand the situation. That was Rav Moshe. So there was a woman. Every month she would come to the yeshiva. She had a sister in Russia. And the sister in Russia couldn't write in Yiddish or in English. She wrote in Russian. And this sister in America, they couldn't read Russian. Rav Moshe read Russian. So every month she'd come to Rav Moshe with her sister's letter. The Rav Moshe would sit down and translate the letter for her. This is a person who's a gadol hador, is the greatest rabbi of our generation, who's got hundreds of questions coming every day. He had time for that. There was a woman every Friday afternoon, right before Shabbos, she called the house and asked, what time is candle lighting? So one of the people in the house said to Rav Moshe, said, Rosh Yeshiva, I'll send her a calendar. She'll see what time it is. He said, no, she's not calling for that. She's calling because she's a lonely soul. She wants to talk to somebody. She knows I'll speak to her. That's what she wants. And he was right. Of course he was right. That's Rav Moshe. It happened to be, now according to legend, I don't know if it's true or not, according to legend, he's supposed to have gone through an entire Talmud 200 times. People do a daf yomi, right? So daf yomi, they finish in 7.5 years, right? 7.5 years. So think about that. Where did he have the time to go 200 times? I don't know if that's true or not. But also the legend is, he went through the entire Shulchan Aruch 400 times. And that is probably true. I don't think that's a legend. Because I know the story is that a young fellow came in, he wanted to show he was big shot. So he came in, and he came to Rav Moshe in the yeshiva, in the middle in front of everybody, and said, I saw the Rosh Yeshiva wrote this and this as a source for what he said. He gave the wrong page. That's not where that is. It's the wrong page. So what does Rav Moshe do? Stops the shir. Now, in the yeshiva there, the base medrash, they had books that went all the way up to the ceiling. Shelves going all the way up to the ceiling. So they had one of these ladders that slides back and forth. Here's Rav Moshe Feinstein, who clambers up the ladder. He was already in the 70s, 80s on the way. Clambers up the ladder, gets the book, brings it down, opens it up, and shows the young boy, see, it's on the page I said it was. So somebody asked him, Rosh Yeshiva had to show him. Rosh Yeshiva said, of course Rosh Yeshiva said, I went over through 400 times I went through Shulchan Aruch. When he goes over 400 times, then he can come and question me. But Moshe said, no, that's not the reason I did it. I'm here to show off. I was afraid that maybe I was wrong and it wasn't on that page. When Moshe got all of those questions, thousands of questions, he never looked in a book. He always did it from memory. And he said, if I can't remember the page, then maybe my memory is going, so I can't trust myself to do it without looking in the book anymore. That's the reason I did it. Okay, so back to Rav Moshe. It's at 9 o'clock. Is everybody okay? We keep on going? I still have, okay, all right. Okay. When he was under 13 years old, he was sent to the yeshiva Slutsk. And the rabbi and the Rosh Yeshiva Slutsk was Rav Isser Zalman Meltzer, who also was a Talmud of the Alter Slobodka. And he was there at 13 years old, and he went there and he studied with him. By the time he was 17, he mastered the entire Talmud with Tosfos, which is a very difficult commentary on the Talmud. At 19, he completed all 4 sections of the Shulchan Aruch and the Tur Shulchan Aruch. And his father at that point told him, you're ready to start answering questions. 19-year-old, ready to start answering questions. At the age of 20, he became the Rav of a city called Luban in Russia. I think it's a White Russia. What's White Russia called today? Belarus, thank you. And he became the Rav. Now, he wasn't married. So what happened was, when he came there, he was the Rav, somebody had to cook his meals for him. So they had this lady from the village, she came in, and she'd cook his meals for him. About a year after that, his sister came to visit him. And the sister said, boy, you must be eating well, you put on some weight. He said, well, the cook is very nice, and she gives me a moo, and she sees I like it, so she gives me another meal. I can't say no to her, so I ate double every time. So the sister said, wow, this must be a great thing. So she tasted. She tasted and spits it out. She said, how can you eat this stuff? It's terrible. He said, well, it's not so bad. I don't want to hurt her feelings. So for 3 years, he ate that stuff, and that's why he put on that weight. That's Rav Moshe. there was a young man in the city of Luban, young boy, maybe 13, 14 years old. And he went off the derech of Torah, the way of Torah. And he unfortunately became a secular Jew. And all of a sudden, a couple of years later, they discovered he has TB, tuberculosis. And the brother of this young boy came to Rav Moshe, and he said to him, "We don't have the money to pay for the medicines to keep him alive. Would you be willing to do it?" So Rav Moshe went to the shul, and he said, "This is what we got to do." Everyone in the shul said, "Absolutely not. We should spend our money on this fellow. He's not Jewish. He spits on Judaism. We're not going to do it." Rav Moshe said, "He can spit, he can do everybody. He's still a Jew. You have to help a Jew." And he raised the money, and the boy was saved. Several years later, the communists now had taken over Russia. They came to Luban already, or Luban, whatever it is, and they came there, and they started questioning to try. Remember, communism says religion is the opiate of the masses. Got to get rid of religion, and certainly Judaism. The communists even had a special section for the Jews called the Ifsexia, made up of Jews, who tried to destroy Judaism, tried to close every mikveh, every shul, every school. These fellas. He even was able to get along with them. But anyway, so it happened to be, so he was called in, but Moshe was called in for questioning by one of the commissars there. And so Moshe is standing there, and what their trick was, they would make you stand for hours, hoping that you'd get weaker, and then you'd break down, and you wouldn't be able to answer, to hide what you're doing. So he's standing there for a couple hours, standing at attention. Finally, the commissar looks up to him, and he says to him, "Your last name is Feinstein?" He said, "Yes." He said, "Are you a rabbi?" He said, "Yes." "Did you know my brother, so-and-so?" Rav Moshe said, "Yes." He said, "You're the one that saved my brother's life?" He said, "Yes." He said, "You're free to go." But from that story came out an interesting thing. You notice that most Jews, when they daven, they shuckle, right? They sway back and forth. Why do you do that? Because it says that all your bones and all your limbs, everything should be davening to Hashem. So you move. But Moshe stood at perfect attention. And he said, if I can stay in perfect attention for hours in front of this fellow, this communist, I certainly, when I stand before God, I can stand at attention as well. And that's why Moshe didn't move. There are other rabbis who also didn't feel you should be swaying back and forth. Anyway, but that's Rav Moshe. After he got married, his wife, he had altogether 5 children, and his children were young, and it was Erev Shabbos, and his wife asked him to mop the floor. So Moshe picked up the mop, started mopping the floor. His father-in-law comes in. Now, I heard a great joke from Rabbi Frankel a few Shabbos ago. He said, behind every great man is a father-in-law who can't believe it's true. I thought that was a great joke. Okay. Anyway, so the father-in-law sees him. He says to his daughter, "Are you crazy? He's mopping a floor of Shabbos. He's been sitting here learning. Every minute you take away from him, the Jewish people will lose." He grabbed that mop and he started mopping. "I'll mop the floor. Don't bother him." When Moshe would take sometimes a nap on Shabbos afternoon, the father-in-law would go to his daughter and say, "Can't let him sleep. You don't know how much Torah is being lost because he's sleeping instead of learning." That's the respect he had of his father-in-law. Okay. In 1925, the communists came to Luban. However, from 1925 to 1930, they left them alone. And in 1930, they started to challenge the rabbis, getting rid of the rabbis, etc. They never started up with Rav Moshe, because Rav Moshe never said anything publicly about communism. He was smart, kept quiet, he kept out of politics, which is, by the way, a good idea in general. And they left him alone until 1930. In 1930, they started bothering him, and they took him out of his home. They said they took him away from his home, and he had to go live. There was a room next to the shul, and that's where he, his wife, and 4 children were living. And Rav Moshe continued to study in all that noise and everything, writing his his responsive to everything, in spite of all of that. Then they finally kicked him out of that, and he had no place to go. But it was a poor shoemaker took him in and gave him this one tzebrach in the room, this room that was falling apart. That's where he was. But Rav Moshe still refused to leave. Many rabbis left. Rav Moshe refused to leave. By the way, it's interesting. The yahrzeits did not bother him. These were Jews who were secular Jews who got turned off by Judaism. But they left Rav Moshe alone. Why? Because they were the children of Jews who knew Rav Moshe. And the parents had such awe of Rav Moshe, and they talked to their children about Rav Moshe, that even these Jews who forgot about Judaism had respect for Rav Moshe, and they left him alone also. That's the awe that he had from these kind of people. Okay. Finally, he didn't know what to do. He didn't want to leave because he saw that every time a rabbi picked himself up and left his shul, there was headlines in, I don't know which one, Pravda, or whatever newspaper they had there. And it said that another rabbi finally got smart and left Judaism, blah, blah, blah. So Rav Moshe felt, if I leave, that will cause a chilul Hashem, profaning God's name. I can't do that. And that's why he refused to leave. But it got to a point where it got impossible. So Rav Moshe happened to meet somehow, I don't remember exactly how, he met Rav Elchanan Wasserman, who was the greatest Talmud of the Chavetz Chaim. So Rav Elchanan said to Rav Moshe, he said to him, he said to him, Chavetz Chaim said you can leave. He said, I never heard that. He said, yeah, he said you can leave. He once said to people, if it's a country that you cannot say the name of God, it's like a bathroom, it's like a toilet. You can't mention God's name in a toilet in the bathroom. You can't mention this, so it's like living in a toilet. You can't live in a toilet. You have to leave. And that was the reason why he finally picked himself up and left and went to America. Came to America. It was not easy, by the way. The visas and everything else was not easy to get. So he finally came to America. He was helped by, he had a sister-in-law there, and the sister-in-law's husband, but he remained there, and he came to. He finally was brought to MTJ. He had other different positions he was saying, but he finally came to MTJ, Mesivta Tzveres Yerushalayim, in the Lower East Side. And he was introduced by the president of the yeshiva. The president of the yeshiva brought all the boys there, they're all sitting there, and he says to them, you know, in the past I brought you a rabbi to study. You studied with him, and then you couldn't learn any more from him because he didn't have any more knowledge to give you. I'm going to bring a rabbi here. Will never, ever will you run out of, ever get to a point where he doesn't have the knowledge to give you, right? He'll always have the knowledge. And that was Rav Moshe. And that was Rav Moshe's beginning to be brought there as well. Okay, I think I'll end there. But again, you can see, just from the stories, you can see what made these people, I have to use a modern term, but awesome. Because you held them in awe. Truly awesome. Great people. Because they gave themselves so much. Think about this. Rav Moshe himself, I have two more stories. I don't have it written down, but two more stories. Rav Moshe, encore, right? Rav Moshe trained all the poskim from America. Posek is a person who is the decider of Jewish law. People go to him. Third story. They came to Rav Moshe. They wrote an article of Rav Moshe. So this person who was writing the article, some lady, I don't know if the New York Times or something, came to Rav Moshe and said, "What? How did they choose you to be the leading rabbi?" So he said, "I don't know. We didn't have an election. I wrote an answer. Some people liked the answer. They told their friends. Their friends liked the answer. They told me. And very soon, that's how people got to know me. That's all. That's how I became what I am." Now, that's one story. The other story is that Rav Moshe. Let me see. Wait. It's trouble when you switch from one story to the other. Forget the other story. What do I want to say? You'll come back to me. Anyway, all right. Oh yes, I remember. Rav Moshe, there's a certain ceremony process called chalitza. There's a law in the Torah that says if a man dies childless, then his brother is supposed to marry his sister-in-law. That's called yibum. If, however, he doesn't want to do that, he goes through a process called chalitza. Chalitza involves a shoe, stepping a shoe. Every one of my students, when I say this, you spit into the shoe. You don't spit into the shoe, but you take off the shoe. And it's like embarrassing to this man that he doesn't want to fulfill this mitzvah. So Rav Moshe, I remember when I was in the yeshiva, Rav Moshe would send messages. Our mashgiach in the yeshiva would always take boys down to see Rav Moshe, because Rav Moshe would, at certain days, do certain things to show them how to do it. So he was doing chalitza. So he did chalitza. He'd save them all up. He did, I think, 20, 30 chalitzas in one day. And so the guys would see it, and they would see how to do it. Rav Nata Greenblatt, Zichrono Livracha. Rav Nata was 19 years old when he was learning about Rav Moshe. And Rav Moshe had him coming. So Rav Nata watched how Rav Moshe did it. Many years later, Rav Nata did chalitza with somebody in Memphis, Tennessee. So a young whippersnapper came in and said to Rav Nata, "That's not how you do it." Rav Nata said, "Oh yeah? I saw Rav Moshe Feinstein do 50 of them, and that's exactly how he did it. So you're going to tell me Rav Moshe didn't know how to do it?" That was the end of that discussion. So you see the greatness of these people. It lives on, again, because of the poskim that they had. Rav Bluth, Rav Weiss, Rav, who was the posik? Anyway, Rav Nata, right, exactly. So anyway, I really hope that we see the importance of rabbis. I hope also you see the importance of when it says, "Aseh lecha rav," make for yourself a rabbi. You should make yourself a rabbi. And I'm not looking for any business, trust me. But you should make for yourself a rabbi, not just to ask questions. My rabbi was Rav Nata Greenblatt. He knew me well enough that I could ask him questions about other things, not just halacha. And I knew I could get an answer from him. That's what you have to have. Because people would say like, but Rav Moshe, for instance, Rav Moshe was discussing the famous question about the microphone came up. See, it's not okay. The microphone. If it isn't, it's too late. The microphone. Issue of microphone. Are you allowed to use a microphone on Shabbos? Because I'm not going to go into halachic issues. But they asked him. So Rav Moshe paskined. So what did Moshe do? Rav Moshe doesn't know how a microphone works. So he brought in experts. They explained to him exactly how it worked. Based upon that, he said, no, you can't use that on Shabbos. So of course people said, what does he know about these things? So he asked a couple experts. So the answer was, Rav Moshe had something called siyata d'shmaya, heavenly help. Heavenly help. So at least another story. I'm sorry. Another story. Rav Moshe, in the last years of his life, was not well. He was in the hospital a lot, and he was on medicines. He had a pacemaker planted into him. It's interesting. Before he had the pacemaker planted into him, he thought about it, and he spoke to doctors, because he said that if God's willing, the Mashiach comes today, they're going to need 70 rabbis for the Sanhedrin. And if he has he has some defect, he can't be on the Sanhedrin. So he wanted to know, if I have this implanted in me, will that make me possible, be unfit to be on the Sanhedrin? That's what he thought about. So anyway, so he's having problems. So there he is in the hospital. Believe it or not, there was a phone right by him. He's in the hospital. His son, Reb David, is right next to him. And he's still getting questions, halachic questions, all the time. So somebody saw that. And he went to Reb David afterwards, and he said, your father's on medicine. Your father is a genius, no question about it. You could count him. But, the medicines do things to people's minds. How do you know he's right? So Reb David looked at him, and he said, my father has siyata d'shmaya. He does. God helps him. He doesn't make a mistake. All right, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, please, everybody. For a chance to get some food.